Okay, first a little housekeeping. Okay. This is my talk, Podiatry Practice in the Year 2043, a futurist talk I gave to the Arizona Podiatry Association in Coronado, California, June 30th, 2018. So let's imagine that today is the Arizona Podiatry Association continuing medical education session at this hotel, the Lowe's Coronado, on Saturday, June 27th, 2043. Of all the predictions I make today, the one I am most certain of is that June 27th, 2043 will be a Saturday. Okay, an outline. What will be the CME class demographics in the year 2043? Who'll be in this room? What will be the demand for podiatry services? What technologies will the podiatrists be using? What will be the challenges to podiatrists that develop over the next 25 years? And what will be the podiatry profession's response to these challenges? First of all, what the class demographics 2043? Well, they'll be mostly post-millennials, people born around the year 2000. Some of you millennials will still be around, approaching retirement. The DNA of the people in this class will be more Asian, Hispanic, and subcontinent Indian than European that we see today. There are several women in the class today, but there will be more females than males in the class in 2043. And all of the people will be salaried, and I'll explain more about that as we go on. Now, the post-millennials, who are they? Well, they were born around the year 2000, as I said. They're alive today. They're in high school or college, perhaps born and living outside the United States, but they're making career choices wherever they are. And the information they gain today will determine which of them will be in this CME class in 2043. Now, the selection of the next generation of podiatrists is going to be very important. There needs to be a leadership in place for the challenges to the profession that will develop. And I'll say more about the post-millennials later and the role we expect them to play. Well, I'm going to be using foresight. Now, foresight is not a prediction. It's just an observation of the direction we are headed. It is not an optimal solution to some problem, and these are certainly not my ideas. It's just the way I and other futurists see this field moving. There are people who call themselves futurists who will give a talk, and what they're really talking about is their own utopia, their own optimal solution to some social or business or political problem. But that is not foresight. The things that they want, they talk about, might never happen because of opposition, and the foresight planners have to take all of this into account. So foresight allows for strategic planning, but with correction. Somebody is elected president we never thought would be president. Okay, things are going to change. A new member of the Supreme Court, things are going to change. We go through the foresight process again. But in foresight, we're interested in the pull from the future rather than a push from the present. Pull from the future. What do I mean? Well, there will be a breaking down of silos, vertical integration of all processes, or as sometimes we say, under one roof. Everything will have a national or global reach, elimination of middlemen. Now, of course, this has already begun. When was the last time you called a travel agent to book a flight? Efficiency with scale. Everything is a huge scale, and all kinds of efficiencies are planned to arise from the scale. The irrelevance of the federal government. Because of polarization, which is only going to get worse, the federal government really cannot pass progressive legislation or deal with the problems that we have. And whatever we have today can disappear tomorrow on the basis of an election. So there will be an expanded role for state government. Now, there's no reason why state governments can't pass laws to protect the environment within their borders. And similarly, states like Maryland and Massachusetts and Minnesota can pass their own version of the Affordable Care Act, regardless of what other states are doing. Now, the states that do this don't necessarily have to start with the letter M. Those are just my choices. The changes in healthcare will be market-driven, not government-driven. The market will find a way to deliver healthcare in a way that I will be describing later. Well, the demand for podiatry services. Over the next 25 years, the population is certainly getting older and heavier. There will be more diabetic due to lifestyle and increased diagnosis because more people are going through the health system and finding out that they have diabetes and seeking care. Organized sports will still be with us, both on a professional and scholastic level. People will be jogging and doing power walking in the future. Biking and walking will increase as they already are. Bike sharing programs and mixed use neighborhoods that have areas for biking and walking. The quantified self. I sometimes call this man's numerical awareness of self. It's the use of Fitbit devices, recording all kinds of daily movement activities used by the well. Gee, I should be walking faster than this. The worried well. Since my toe started hurting, I really have lost walking speed. And the post-op. I had my surgery 60 days ago, and I still haven't recovered my pre-op walking speed. All of these will cause visits to the podiatrist. On the other hand, Amazon, because of Amazon, less walking in the mall. And that will continue. And in fact, in 25 years, there won't be any malls anymore. Autonomous vehicles, fewer accidents, decline in traditional factory and agricultural employment, people standing less in the factory and less getting into industrial and agricultural accidents. That may cause a little decrease in demand. But, and this is very important, podiatry is evidence-based. Because it's evidence-based, there will always be a demand. Insurance companies will always reimburse. There will not have to be a defense of the profession because of what they do. Technology, the Internet of Things, nanoparticles in shoes and implants that send signals to the podiatrist on walking frequency and pace. And the signals that come electronically won't just be numbers, but also graphics on the patient performance over time. And there will be virtual videos. By that I mean, take a picture of the patient in your office standing, profile picture, and now the nanoparticles will send information to the software that will use that photo and recreate the walking of that patient, the gait, the stance, the movement of arms, all of that will come from information in the shoes. So a podiatrist can review these graphics and these virtual videos before a patient visits, or over time, like every day or every week, but certainly a few days before the patient's visit, and then go over this information with the patient. This is the way you were walking 60 days ago, 30 days ago, and yesterday. And the nanoparticles will also be in drugs. So you will find out, is the patient compliant with the antifungal that you prescribed? And is that antifungal being properly metabolized? If not, you may want to switch to another prescription. Now, remember this, we've all used this at one time or another. At many New Balance stores, there is this device that this customer is standing in. You see her feet there? And that device is sending information to the tablet that the salesperson is holding. And that information are all the specifications of the ideal shoe size for this customer. And now, presumably, this salesperson can go over to the shelf and pick out a shoe appropriate for this customer. However, we're getting into the era of 3D printing of shoes. This is a 3D printed midsole running shoe, printed at a New Balance store from information being sent to the tablet and to the 3D printing machine. 3D printing will be in shoes, in inserts, and in implants. The podiatrist can specify shoe measurements in the office and print in the office certain typical shoes. But for fancy shoes, leather or faux leather, the podiatrist can send the specs electronically to a shoe store where they can do the 3D printing. Patient goes to the store and picks up the shoe. Also, 3D printing of body parts from stem cells, the end of the use of cadaver parts. And 4D printing. 4D printing is the printed material based on new polymers changes over time. We're seeing pioneering efforts with 4D printing with cardiac stents and orthodontic appliances today, but perhaps pediatric toe implants. And some of you may have used skin grafts to treat diabetic ulcers of the foot or other kinds of wounds. If so, skin grafts would be a likely application of 4D printing. Sports medicine, wearable devices and sensors. That means all clothing will have nanosensors in it, not just shoes. And this allows for the monitoring activity of all people, even those who've not been injured. And at Johns Hopkins, we are working on statistical methods for this high throughput data that will come from wearable devices to reduce the data for something that would be meaningful for clinicians to use with their patients. In rehab, anti-gravity treadmills are being developed that allow workout without a full load bearing, and this certainly would be useful to podiatrists in the post-op era. Blockchain. Blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin. I am not here to convince you should invest or not invest in Bitcoin, but the generalization of blockchain technology is it's for trusted transactions and records that are kept. Only the owner can get into it and transfer it to other people. So we will have the complete health record from birth to present on electronic health records protected in blockchain. Now, of course, the birth to present will only apply to people who are born after the blockchain era begins. But when that begins, these records are totally portable, and go to a new physician, a new podiatrist, there is the record. And a person who lives in Los Angeles might go to Chicago on business, and there is a need to see a doctor who they don't know. Voila, here is my blockchain health record. The physician knows everything about the patient. That would be extremely important if the patient comes in a coma. Also, this will be the end of people sitting in the waiting room with the clipboard trying to recall surgeries they had 20 or 40 years ago. Well, there have been changes in medicine already, and they will continue. In the 1950s, supply of physicians created demand, rather than demand creating the supply. The podiatrist was usually, in those days, practicing in an extra room in their home. And they would move into a new neighborhood, hang out a sign that says podiatrist. Some person is walking by and sees the sign and says, oh, a podiatrist is now in the neighborhood. Maybe I should pop in to see why this toe is hurting me, or about this wart that has appeared on the bottom of my foot. Before that sign went up, this person would never have thought of seeking clinical help. This is how supply created demand. Well, in 2018, physicians have gone from business owners in the 20th century to salaried shift workers in large organizations in the 21st century. The reasons for this are mostly financial. People are graduating with too much debt to buy or start a solo practice, and having a solo practice is impractical anyway because of the overhead needed to run a practice with the software and hardware that must be purchased, paid for, and maintained today. Also, reimbursement trends and practices make it impractical to break even by seeing 5 patients in an hour in many practices. We are seeing the onset of the healthcare conglomerates. These activities I'm about to describe, these business organizations, all have occurred in the last 12 months, and they're going to continue. You know, CVS is a pharmacy chain. They are a pharmacy benefits manager. They have certainly the minute clinics in their stores, but they also own urgent care centers, and they have primary care in some of their pharmacy stores. Aetna is a large health insurer. They have they own hospitals and practices and clinics. So the two of them coming together is an ultimate vertical integration of all the services that we might need in healthcare. Similarly, Cigna, health insurer, Express Scripts, pharmacy benefit manager. Cigna also owns hospitals. Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire Hathaway. How did these three come together? Well, first of all, Amazon has registered in 13 states to ship prescription drugs. And presumably Amazon and JP Morgan, they say they want to work together in order to find out how can we better provide health insurance and health care to our employees. But because Berkshire Hathaway is involved with them, this will probably be a national rollout of something. Walmart is pharmacies, as well as pharmacy benefit manager. Humana owns hospitals and practices, and Humana is also sells policies for Medicare Advantage plans, Medicare Part C. Again, it's a similar vertical integration. United Healthcare is, I believe, the largest health insurer. They also own health facilities, MedExpress, a pharmacy benefit manager, and Walgreens. Walgreens is everything that CVS is, but they are also in an alliance with Boots. Boots is a large European pharmacy chain. So this indicates, Walgreens is the only international pharmacy as a result of that, but it also indicates that these healthcare conglomerates can appear in European countries someday in order to supplement the state-run health programs that are active in those countries. A hospital consortium is actually manufacturing generic drugs on a nonprofit basis to be used within their walls and to distribute these generic drugs, supposedly on a nonprofit basis, to other hospitals not in the consortium. Of course, if these hospitals get into a healthcare conglomerate, then the conglomerates will also be manufacturing generic drugs. Hospitals have, for some time, been manufacturing shampoo for use within their walls in accordance with FDA monographs. This is quite a step from that, but it's not like they haven't done manufacturing before. So let's say in the United States, there were 4 HCCs nationwide. That would be an oligopoly, not perfect competition, but at least some competition. But each HCC is like a mini UK national health system. Own everything. We own all the pieces, just like UK does on a national basis. But this is the American version of the UK national health system. Public companies, investors, competition, and through competition, they can sustain services, presumably. The UK, the health system goes up and down depending on the budget and which party is in power, as it has been doing in the last 5 or 10 years. That will not be the case with competition. Now, people will become members in an HCC in a way that I'll describe later. But membership includes health insurance, pharmacy benefits, fitness centers, I'm sure, clinical labs, employee health service, nursing homes, and rehab. Now, by what I mean by employee health service, Walgreens, as one example, runs the employee health service for many large employers. If I were to take a job at one of those companies that Walgreens is providing this service, that might be a signal to me that I should join the Walgreens HCC and have a complete service wherever I go and for my family. Now, care would be given through HCC providers, and this will be done on the basis of what we today call an HMO, something very similar to that. And of course, podiatrists will want to be among those providers. There will be first dollar coverage. What that means is no deductibles, no copay. People will pay a higher premium, yes, but that will be offset because there would be no deductibles and no copay. And with this in operation in this vague way I've been describing, and I'll describe more, do we really need Obamacare anymore? Do we have to worry about a mandate? I have answers to this coming up. The HCCs will be for profit and public. Some might be mutual companies. In the early 20th century, the life insurance companies were mutuals. This meant that anyone who had a policy was also a shareholder in the life insurance company. Insurance companies are not that way anymore, but they might return. Another possibility is people could buy preferred stock in their HCC, and the dividends could pay for part of their premiums. Of course, mergers are possible between the HCCs, and there'd have to be some federal state intervention to preserve competition. Now, if they would actually, the federal government would actually nationalize the HCCs, that could lead to Medicare for all. But I can't see the federal government nationalizing anything, regardless of which party is in power. If anything, there'd be privatization. But anyway, what about Medicare for all? Medicare for all, government run, can lead to underinsurance. Depending on the outcome of elections, the benefits go up and down, as I described for the UK before. And also, the United States is not continental Europe. Continental Europe countries can have universal health insurance because those countries all have their deep socialist roots. And the labor unions are more powerful in these countries than they are in America to preserve a certain level of quality. So HCC may be competition, each giving the best deal to people seeking membership better than, and we will get universal coverage from this in a way that I will describe. Now, in rural areas, well, maybe there won't be 4 HCCs that want to operate in a rural area. So some states will contract with 1 HCC or be shared by 2 HCCs perhaps for the rural areas. In 25 years, fewer people than today will be living in rural areas. Well, what about the financing? Well, membership in an HCC can be offered as an employee benefit. It can be a pre-tax payroll deduction. It can be a required payroll deduction for catastrophic care. What do I mean by that? When I started to work my first job, I was wondering, looking at my paycheck, and I was wondering, where are all these deductions coming from? There was in New York State at the time, and still, and in most states, deductions for unemployment insurance and disability insurance. This was not money that was in an account for me, money put into a pool for people seeking those benefits at the current time. Similarly, we can have a required payroll deduction for membership in the HCC, but required not for membership, required at least for catastrophic care. I'm surprised this hasn't happened yet. Everybody should be covered, regardless of their age, for catastrophic care. However, if somebody chooses, I want to have catastrophic care only, that is the minimum required by law, there will be a penalty, because a patient who chooses that, or a person who chooses that, then when they go and say, well, now I want full care, the pre-existing conditions will apply. Whereas if someone starts out with the full insurance at whatever level, but more than catastrophic care, then there will be no discounting of pre-existing conditions. Now, all of this is okay for employees, but what is the future of employment? We are headed for a gig economy. Jobs are being eliminated faster than they can be created. People in the future, 60% is most of the projections, will be on contract employment for periods of time. And that will mean intermittent unemployment. So people will be seeking jobs, and many people will go for retraining at co-learning centers. Co-learning centers are places where people can be efficiently certified for other occupations. So somebody who is an accountant might go to a co-learning center and get certification to be an insurance adjuster, and they can go back and forth between accounting and insurance adjusting at whichever way the wind is blowing for them. There will be a merging of salaried and contract employment. People just earn money. They're not salaried or contract anymore. And that will mean a reduction of legal protection that salaried employees have always had. Now, universal basic income. There is experimentation with universal basic income now in progressive countries and in certain counties in the United States. Randomized studies, some people are randomized to get universal basic income, some are randomized to get just as is today, and then compare the two groups. What is it? Each citizen above 18 years of age or older receives, say, $1,500 per month administered by Social Security. Everybody gets this, including Bill Gates, and whether they are working or not at the time. There may be some supplement to this federal amount by some state agencies through block grants that they have received. The HCCs will eventually be more powerful than the NRA is today. So there will be deductions for HCC enrollment with catastrophic care, a minimum. So if somebody is receiving $1,500 a month, they may only get a net of $1,100 a month because of the required deduction for HCC membership. Now, patient concerns. In 2018, patient would say, gee, I have this annoying toenail fungus. In 2043, patient says, where's my next job coming from? For this reason, we see less elective and cosmetic and more acute services for podiatrists in the future. Well, what will a community of the future look like? Well, it'll look like more than just these items, but I just want to highlight this. Co-working centers. We're seeing them spring up already. Co-working center is people who are freelancers or who work for large corporations go to, who would alternatively work out of their homes, will go to a place where they can have individual offices or just space in a long bench of computers to do their work. And this is for people who prefer to work with other people. But large corporations like Pfizer Pharmaceuticals have salespeople who work out of their homes all over the country, and they are now sending their people to co-working establishments for better security. In addition, the co-working establishments have hardware, software, and daycare. No need to invest in those things at home. I described a co-learning center before. It's somewhat similar, but it's where people go to learn a new occupation from time to time. There will be, of course, high-rise housing, and there will be the HCC presence worked in. The HCCs will be worked into areas where there's co-working centers. Also, in the high-rise housing, someone could live on the 12th floor and take the elevator to their co-working area on the 2nd floor. The HCCs will be operating micro-hospitals, hospitals with, say, 20 beds for more common procedures that where it isn't necessary to go to a big medical center. And I'm not talking about day surgery here. I'm talking about 20 beds, the kinds of procedures that podiatrists often perform in hospitals will be mostly in micro-hospitals. The micro-hospitals will have an ER and even a rehab space. Now, there'll be high-rise housing for seniors, but what I'm not, and let's talk about 55 plus high-rise housing for seniors. I'm not talking about independent living going on to assisted living, going on to nursing care. I'm talking about people perfectly well living in a high-rise housing. However, on the ground floor of this high-rise housing, there will be primary care. operated by an HCC. Now, anybody can go to this primary care facility, not just people who live in the building, but the advantage is somebody on the 10th floor has a fall, a physician's assistant can come right up and then bring them down to the care facility if that's necessary. And even if necessary, a physician can go to the 10th floor to care for the patient. Now, podiatrists would certainly want to be on at least an on-call basis to such a facility. Now, what about the HCCs and the podiatrists? The podiatrists want assimilation without loss of identity. I'm beginning to sound like a rabbi here. But they don't want to be supervised by an orthopedist who will decide how many podiatrists are needed on staff and what procedures they can perform. This takes some leadership to negotiate this. So the challenges are among them, ensure a supply of podiatrists for group practices to be part of HCCs, but separate from orthopedics as one strategy. So, how do we get more podiatrists? Well, we can shorten the residency. That might make it more attractive. Greater efficiency of service through group practice and a branding strategy. And I will now describe each of these. Supply. Podiatry school enrollment is down. Accelerating retirements. The baby boomers who entered the profession in the early 1970s are now retiring, and that was a big group of people. College enrollment, undergraduate enrollment for anything is decreasing. Students are concerned about acquiring debt for themselves or acquiring debt for their parents. And indeed, with the gig economy that is coming, what is really the value of a college education? They wonder. Now, some of this will be financing of college will be offset by intergenerational financing of undergraduate education. A college like Arizona State, people graduate for the first 15 years, say, after graduation, they are taxed on a sliding scale that in order to pay for the cost of the current undergraduates at Arizona State, perhaps 80% of the cost, not 100%. Now, when the current cohort of undergraduates graduate, then they will be taxed to finance the next generation of undergraduates. The advantage of this is the government and all their regulations is out of it, and all of their overhead is out of it. This is something that each university decides on their own how they want to do it and implement it. In addition, podiatry could be a path to a green card. There can be recruiting of bright people in other countries and say, if you will come to America and study in a podiatry school, upon graduation, you can get a green card and eventually become a citizen. So what about residency? Well, reduce the residency by 1 year. This is not far-fetched. The orthopedists are headed to be trained as hand, knee, and hip only. If you go to a group orthopedics practice, you find out this doctor is for the hand, this doctor is for the knee, this doctor is for the hip. Given that this will continue to be the case, people may be trained, orthopedists may be trained in residency only for the hand, only for the knee, and only for the hip. This can reduce their residency. In addition, they might eliminate the internal medicine rotations that they go through. If they do that, a foot orthopod and a podiatrist will be very close, almost identical training. Will they become arch rivals? I think you've heard that one before. But they can perhaps coexist. The MDs and the DOs, the osteopaths, coexist in internal medicine practices. The reason for this is that people have finally realized that the MDs and the DOs have almost identical training in their 4-year programs. And indeed, in the subspecialties like cardiology and oncology, the DOs are admitted to those residencies alongside the MDs. So certainly the training is the same and they can coexist. Efficiency of service is going to come through group practices, not solo practice, and further efficiency through trained assistants. What do I mean by that? First, we had dental hygienists. Now we have dental therapists in certain states today and rolling out across the country. A dental therapist is someone trained to fill cavities. So under the supervision of a dentist. So a dentist comes into the room and says, yes, fill number 22 and use drill number 3. And then walks on, because it's a group practice, the dentist walks on now to another room to be useful. And you may be used to seeing your favorite dentist on West Adams Street, maybe in a solo practice. And many dentists you've seen have been in solo practice, but they're moving to groups also. In the East Coast, we have the dental reverse mortgage. What this is, a dentist is 60 years old. He or she is approached by a big corporation, and they say, we will buy your practice in 5 years. We will pay for the practice in accordance with a formula based on the number of patients and the revenues you have had in the last year of your practice. Then we'll buy it, and then Mr. or Ms. Dentist, you can enter the group practice that we're forming, or you can be completely retired. So in the group practices, of course, there are the general dentists, the periodontist, the endodontist, the dental surgeons, all in one room, or one suite, I should say. And the orthopedists already have physicians' assistants, nurse practitioners, and physical therapists in their practices, creating a sort of a vertical integration, but creating efficiencies. Now, the podiatrist could presumably have podiatry assistants, perhaps trained in a 2-year program at the podiatry schools, or at least they can train physician assistants to work in podiatry practices. There is some competition from the huge medical centers in that there is a trend toward comprehensive diabetic and obesity programs, as just 2 examples. This is sometimes called the medical home. It is patient-centered rather than provider-centered. So the different medical specialties, say, and social workers, dietitians, psychologists, group therapy, all work together for the patient's obesity problem or diabetic lifestyle problem, all contributing. But the patient is the center, not each type of doctor or the psychologist separate from the doctor. Surely the podiatrists will want a place at the table in this. They have a role and they want to be a part of this comprehensive care for patients when it makes sense. Now, competition and branding. The podiatry schools are not branded. They don't have football teams. They don't have Nobel Prize winners or cabinet members among their alumni. And this can affect sometimes patient choice. If a patient needs ankle surgery and they go on the internet to see, well, who is in my neighborhood, they may see orthopedists from Harvard or Vanderbilt, trained at Harvard or Vanderbilt, Or they might see schools like these two, and I'm not just picking on these two schools, I just took them off a list. But the idea is when it comes down to a choice, the person may say, gee, I don't know these podiatry schools, but I know what Harvard and Vanderbilt, they are a brand. I'll go with one of those. Not all the time, but it can happen. However, the good news is branding will happen, especially on the kind of leadership the profession is going to need. What's going to happen? Big data is everywhere. All podiatrists will participate in shared big data, including images using electronic health records. All the podiatrists will use uniform software. All of their data will be pooled. Now, then there can be an analysis. There can be a sophisticated analysis, artificial intelligence methods that called machine learning for different treatment options. That is looking at all of the characteristics of patients and the outcomes. Now a patient comes to a podiatrist practice, they enter all the information, and the software says, machine learning says, these are the best treatment options, and these are the percent success and failure of the options for your current patient, and or at least if not that, different possibilities of best practices are listed together with the success rates, and the podiatrist can make a choice. And following best practices created in this way also would be helpful in the cases, in case there is a malpractice case someday. Now, CancerLink is used by oncologists all over the world. They are contributing all of their data in the way I just described to a huge pool of data. And a cancer patient comes in and they go through this process, and this gives some idea to the oncologist of how they might treat this patient. Now, oncologists typically get their information from new research, from clinical trials published in the literature. But the patients that are seen in clinical trials do not represent those kinds of patients that are seen in practice because of the strict eligibility requirements for entry into a clinical trial. So CancerLink is more practical to help them decide which to use. So presumably in the future, only podiatrists would have this resource that might be called FootLink. Now, EHR facilitates podiatry clinical trials, industry-sponsored. A patient comes in, the data are entered on that patient's problem, and the EHR can say, well, are there any or what clinical trials are operating today that this patient is eligible for? If the patient consents to be in a clinical trial, the podiatrist automatically becomes an investigator in that trial. It might be the only patient they enter, but this is the kind of clinical trials that the insurance companies want today because they're pragmatic. There's a great variety of providers, not just the cap and gown people at the big medical centers. Also, a bigger variety of types of patients than typically wind up being treated at the big medical centers. Don't worry about the orthopedists doing this. You know the definition of a double-blind study? 2 orthopedists doing research. That was meant to be a joke. There can also be collaboration with all of these data, collaboration with Fitbit, New Balance, and other companies. And some group practices will have complete 3D printed shoe stores as part of the group practice using proprietary materials only in a podiatry practice. And smart shoes will send a weight and activity and vital signs to the podiatrist. And based on some of these data they get, the podiatrist can become a member of a team by making referrals to different types of internists based on some of this information that is general, but not just relate to the foot. So who are the post-millennials? What do we know about them in 2018? This information comes from the surveys of the Pew Trust. They're digital natives. They're acquiring college debt. They're not interested in material possessions. They are risk averse, and they're interested in public services like HCCs and universal basic income. This is good. The leadership that is needed as we move toward 2043, critical thinking, collaboration, working in a group setting rather than solo, compromise, they won't always have their own way, flexibility because of the changes that are taking place, entrepreneurship. A podiatrist should not be saying, I can't operate a shoe store in my podiatry practice. I am a podiatrist, not a shoe salesman. That will not be the correct attitude. Marketing in the future, just as has always happened in the past. So the podiatry profession must select the next generation of leaders who can work in a group setting, work with assistants, and maintain identity when part of an HCC. I'm almost finished, but some parting wisdom from Yogi. The future is not what it used to be. 2043, bring it on. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that we might meet in the future.